Every war has its legends. Patton, Rommel, Zhukov, men who turned chaos into victory through sheer nerve and brilliance. But for every general who won a war, there was one who nearly lost it single-handedly, not through bad luck, through ego, cowardice, or a refusal to see what was right in front of them. These are the 7 worst generals of World War II, and the disasters they left behind still get studied in military academies today as examples of exactly what not to do. In February 1943, American forces clashed with Rommel's Afrika Korps at Kasserine Pass, and it turned into one of the worst defeats the American Army suffered in the entire war. The man in charge, General Lloyd Frydendahl, wasn't anywhere near the fighting. He set up his command post 70 miles behind the front inside a ravine and spent weeks having engineers blast a bomb-proof bunker into the rock instead of preparing his men's defenses. He almost never visited the front line. His orders came from maps, not from anyone who'd actually seen the terrain, and some of them were written in a personal code so confusing that his own officers couldn't decipher them in time to act. When German tanks broke through, over 1,000 Americans were killed and thousands more captured. Eisenhower relieved him within weeks. Frydendahl went home, got a quiet promotion to a training post, and never saw combat again. Nobody under his command was sorry to see him go. France had one of the largest, best-equipped armies in Europe in 1940. It didn't matter. General Maurice Gamelin built his entire defense around the assumption that Germany would repeat the First World War playbook and attack through Belgium. So that's where he sent his best divisions. The one place he left thin was the Ardennes forest, which French doctrine considered too dense for tanks to move through. German armor went through it anyway, in force, and within days they had broken through and were racing for the coast, cutting off the very army Gamelin had sent north. His headquarters did not even have a direct phone line to his commanders during the critical hours of the collapse. France surrendered in 6 weeks. Gamelin spent the rest of the war as a prisoner, first of the Vichy government and then of Germany itself. By late 1942, Friedrich Paulus and his entire 6th Army were trapped inside Stalingrad, surrounded by Soviet forces. He had a real chance to break out while his men still had strength and ammunition. His own field commanders begged him to try. He refused, because Hitler and Berlin promised the army would be resupplied by air and rescued by a relief force. Neither happened. The Luftwaffe delivered a fraction of what his men needed to survive a Russian winter, and the relief attempt stalled dozens of miles short. Paulus waited for permission that never came, while his soldiers froze and starved. Hitler even promoted him to field marshal in the final days, banking on an old German tradition that no field marshal had ever surrendered. Paulus surrendered anyway. Of the 91,000 men taken with him, fewer than 6,000 ever made it home. By May 1944, Allied forces in Italy had Germany's 10th Army nearly trapped, one push away from a total collapse of the German position in Italy. General Mark Clark had the order to cut off their escape route. Instead, with the trap almost closed, he redirected his forces toward Rome. He wanted to be the general who captured the city, and he wanted his name in American papers before the British got any credit. The Germans slipped through the gap he opened and regrouped further north, dragging the Italian campaign out for nearly another year of brutal fighting. Clark got his headline on June 5, 1944. The next morning, the Normandy landings began, and his moment vanished from the front page in a single day. In September 1941, 4 Soviet armies, more than 600,000 men, were encircled and destroyed around Kiev in the largest encirclement in military history. Semyon Budyonny commanded the front that let it happen. He'd made his name as a cavalry commander in the Russian Civil War, charging on horseback through a very different kind of war. By 1941, that entire style of thinking was 2 decades out of date, and Budyonny never adapted. He was one of Stalin's most loyal allies, a man who'd backed the purges that wiped out the Red Army's most capable officers because it cleared his own path to the top. When those purges left the army commanded by loyalists instead of professionals, Kiev is what it cost. In March 1944, Renya Mutaguchi sent 3 divisions, roughly 85,000 men, into the hills of northeast India with barely 2 weeks of supplies, convinced they would simply capture British food and ammunition as they advanced. The British did not cooperate. His own commanders warned him the plan could not work before it even started. He ignored every one of them, and when things fell apart, he fired the commanders who told him the truth instead of changing course. What followed became known in Japanese accounts as the Road of Bones. More than 53,000 of his men were killed, wounded, or died from starvation and disease in the retreat. It remains the largest defeat in Japanese military history. On February 15, 1942, a British general walked toward Japanese lines carrying a white flag. Arthur Percival commanded 85,000 troops defending Singapore. The Japanese force coming for him, under General Yamashita, numbered around 30,000 men who were low on food, water, and ammunition. Percival didn't know that. He believed he was facing an unstoppable enemy, and he'd built his defenses to repel an attack from the sea, leaving the landward approach, the direction the Japanese actually came from, dangerously exposed. Yamashita was bluffing with almost nothing left in reserve. Percival folded anyway. Churchill called it the worst disaster in British military history. Thousands of the men who surrendered that day never made it home. 7 generals, 7 different armies. Look at what actually connects them. Fredendall hid behind his own lines. Gamelin defended the wrong forest. Paulus waited for a rescue that was never coming. Clark chased a headline. Budioni brought a cavalry mindset to a tank war. Mutaguchi ignored every warning his own staff gave him. And Percival surrendered to a bluff. None of them lacked resources. None of them lacked rank. What they lacked, at the exact moment it mattered most, was the willingness to see what was actually happening in front of them, instead of what they wanted to believe. That's what made them the worst generals of the Second World War, and it's their men who paid for it. If you want the next list to cover the opposite side of this, the generals who somehow won with nothing, drop it in the comments.